You're not making things better, you're just making them different is a phrase that always pops in my head whenever I'm doing anything creative. Whenever you do any kind of work, especially creative work, it feels like there's this huge emphasis on trying to do your best, right? And that's something that just exists in every field. But I think there are times when we don't always recognize when something is our best. It's really easy to look at a project, to look at a piece of writing or a piece of art or a video or anything. It's really easy to listen to a piece of music and to go, oh man, I can make this better. And so that's when you start tinkering with it. It feels like there always comes a point when you're working on something and you're not really making it better, you're just changing things about it. And this idea that you're not making something better, you're just changing it, doesn't refer to big overhauls or anything like that. Really, what I think this saying refers to is little minor changes that no one will notice. So for instance, whenever I do a video, one of the very last things that I do is I insert music. And I struggled with this a lot whenever I was first making videos because I didn't want the music to be too loud, but at the same time, I wanted it to be audible. I wanted for the viewers to know that there was music there and to be able to hear it, but I didn't want it to be overwhelming my voice. So I think in this example, whenever you're mixing music, there's a point when it's obviously too loud and you can't hear anything I'm saying. And then there's a point when it's silent and you don't hear it at all. And then I think there's a healthy range in the middle where it can be a little bit louder or a little bit quieter or whatever, and no one will care. And so whenever I first started making videos, I would mess with that a lot. I would go, okay, is this too loud? And then I would lower it by a couple decibels, and then I would go, oh no, now it's too quiet. And then I would raise it by a couple decibels, and I would go back and forth. And the fact of the matter is that no one cares. As long as you can hear my voice, then you're good, basically. Because for me, there's always a certain point when lowering or raising the volume of the music isn't making the video better. It's just me changing things and it's just me wasting time. And I think this logic applies to any and all creative works. I'm thinking of the Mona Lisa specifically. The story with the Mona Lisa is that Leonardo da Vinci worked on it, and then he kept on working on it and worked on it and worked on it for years and years and years. And it is probably the most popular painting ever. So with that idea in mind, that it's like the most famous piece of art ever, it's hard to argue that any work was wasted on it. But still, I think there's probably a point when Leonardo da Vinci wasn't making the Mona Lisa better, he was just changing things about it. But this feeling that you're not bettering things, you're just changing them is something that I've encountered a lot in my prose writing. If you have a story, the first draft of it is going to need some revisions before you show it to anyone. So you revise it, and then from there you'll probably need more revisions and edits and whatever else. But for me, I've hit the point before where I've rewritten a sentence like 10 or 11 times, and then I've just gone back to the first or second version of the sentence. Because in that sort of scenario, the versions after the first or second sentence might be good, but they weren't any better than the original versions. Again, you're not making things better, you're just making them different. If you're not bettering something, there's a chance that by changing things about it, you will actually worsen the work. So I think there does come a time when it's better to just quit while you're ahead, but at the same time, you don't want to quit too soon. You don't want to put out something that is unfinished or garbage or whatever else. And I do think that there is a point where in order to know that you're just changing things and not making it better, I do think you have to indulge in some of that a little bit. I think that if you put something out while still feeling like you could do a better job on it, then I think that will eat away at you, and that will cause you to wonder, would the work have been more popular if I'd put more work into it? Would the video have taken off if only I had lowered the music volume by a couple decibels? Would my story have been picked up by a publisher if only I had changed the intro sentence a couple of times? And so I think that in order to make yourself feel better about your work, in order to satiate that curiosity, I think that you have to indulge in a little bit of just changing things for the sake of changing things, because you don't really realize that's what you're doing whenever you're doing it. Or really what I'm saying with this is that I think sometimes you have to cross the line in order to know where the line is. And I think it's important to know this because, like I was saying, there comes a point where if you're just changing things, then you may be actively hurting or ruining the work. Or at the very least, if you're working on something when it should be done, then that's keeping you away from doing other work. There's an interview I listened to between Rick Rubin and Trent Reznor that I found really interesting. Trent Reznor tells a story about how in the late 80s, Trent Reznor would just work on the same set of songs and he would try to improve them and make them better and whatever else. But then Rick Rubin came along and he was like, instead of putting all your effort into these 10 songs, why don't you just try to write 100 songs? Instead of changing these songs around and trying to make them better, what if you just started something new and then maybe came out with a better song as a result of that? Because again, there comes a point when you're not making things better, you're just changing them. There are certain ideas and certain things that are just never going to be your best work. And so I think because of that, it's good to just move through them and move past them as quickly as you can, so that way you can move on to something new, which can become your best work. So what I mean by this is that if Trent Reznor had just worked on the same 10 songs over and over and over again and he had never written anything new, then he wouldn't have made his later albums in the 90s with 9 Inch Nails. And he had just continued working on them and never moved past that, then he wouldn't have accomplished any of the great things that he did after that. Sometimes you just have to finish a work and move on so that way you can do something better. And I think that's where that saying comes from, that art is never finished, only abandoned, because really, I feel this way about my stuff, and I'm sure everyone else who has ever done anything creative feels this way about their stuff. It always feels like looking back, I could have done more for a video or something. It always feels like looking back, I could have done something to better a piece of writing. And the fact of the matter is that that's probably true. There are oftentimes things that can be done to improve something. But I think that if you are stuck working on one thing and you're down in the trenches and you're just working on the same thing over and over and over again, day after day after day for a long period of time, I think that you will be unable to recognize what needs to be changed just because your focus is so narrowed in on this one piece of work. Oftentimes, in order to know what needs to be changed, you need a fresh set of eyes. And I think oftentimes there is only so good that a certain work can be made before you just need to call it quits and move on. I'm sure that if you talk to the person who made your favorite album or favorite movie or favorite comic, manga, whatever, I'm sure if you talk to them and ask them if they had concerns or if they had things they didn't like about their first work, I'm sure they would say yes. I'm sure that the creator of Chainsaw Man has things that he doesn't like about the first volume of that book. But the thing is, I don't think you go anywhere as an artist, I don't think you go anywhere as a creative without having a body of work. There are people who did one thing and that's it, and that's what they're known for. Harper Lee, who did To Kill a Mockingbird, comes to mind. Most people aren't like that. Most people who are successful in creative fields have many things. They have many songs, they have many albums, they have many movies or comics, books, whatever else. Most people don't have their first work be absolutely perfect, and so I think because of that, it's necessary to move on past that. Again, there comes a point in everything when you're not making it better, you're just changing it. There are stories about Stanley Kubrick where he had actors shoot the same scenes over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And the thing is, if you're a perfectionist like that, yeah, I think you're eventually going to get a perfect shot, but at the same time, it's a question of at what cost. I think that if you shoot the same scene 100 times, then you will probably end up with pretty solid takes the first couple times, and then everything after that will just be wasted camera space. I think that if you took your favorite book and you adjusted the wording of a single sentence by a little bit, I think it would still be your favorite book. I think that if you took your favorite song and you lowered the volume of an instrument by 0.01 decibels, I think it would still be your favorite song. I think if you took your favorite movie and you replaced one scene with a different take than the one that was used, I think it would still be your favorite movie. So the point I'm trying to make with all this is that I think there is a range of good things that can be done. Really, I'm talking about the same idea that I talked about whenever I was dressed like a vampire, which is that you can't have perfection, you can only have imperfection, or you can have nothing. You can either make something that you perceive as an imperfect work, or you can make nothing, because you can't have perfection. No matter how hard you work on something, no matter how long you spend changing and adjusting things, you will still have problems with your work, I promise you. If you just spend all your time adjusting and messing with a single piece of work, I think that will stifle your creativity, and I don't think you'll be any better off than you would have been if you had just called it quits sooner. And again, I'm not saying to just throw your art out there when it's unfinished. I'm not saying that you shouldn't spend time to properly finish something. But what I am saying is that I think there comes a time when you're not actually making something better, you're just changing it. I think the secret to being better as an artist is by doing more. I talked about this in my 2 Paths to Greatness video, which kind of sums up my entire creative philosophy. Really, I think that if you want to get better, I think if you want to become more popular or more successful, then just doing more stuff is the way to go about it. There's a video called The Gap by Ira Glass where he talks about this, and I think it's just so brilliant. To sum up his thoughts, essentially he just says that the reason why you started wanting to do creative work in the first place is because you had good taste. The reason you first wanted to do art is because you saw cool art, and you said, I want to make something like that. But whenever you first start, you are a fool, you are a novice, and so because of that, you do not live up to your own standards. And so the quickest way to close that gap between where you are and where you want to be is by doing a huge volume of work in a short period of time. Or it doesn't even have to be a short period of time, you just have to do a huge volume of work. As you keep on practicing and moving on from one thing to the next, then you will get better. And so all I'm trying to say with this video is be careful that you're not limiting your progress by sticking to one piece of work and by working on it forever and ever and ever. Ask yourself honestly, Am I making this piece of art better, or am I just changing it? I don't think anything ever really lives up to expectations, but I think that sometimes we can be really hard on ourselves. I've talked to people about my videos and I've been like, yeah, I have this problem with it, and this problem with it, and this problem with it. And usually people are like, oh, I didn't even notice. Or whenever people do notice the things that I perceive as problems, they're like, yeah, this isn't a problem for me. So anyways, that's what I got to say. Thank you for watching. Have a nice night, and goodbye. Bye.